Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the DNA of the ultimate, unapologetic American sports car, the Dodge Viper. Listen, if you're a fan of automotive history, engineering that completely defies logic, and machines that command absolute respect, well, you're in exactly the right place. We are going to uncover the complete story of the American death machine. Okay, let's jump right in with what I think is the most perfect summary of what made this car an absolute legend. The automotive journalists over at Jalopnik once described the Viper as a barely restrained explosion with seatbelts. And honestly, they hit the nail on the head. This was a vehicle defined by pure chaos, completely rejecting all that refinement and subtlety that European sports cars were so obsessed with at the time. To really understand this machine, we're going to run a system scan across 5 phases. We'll start with the genesis of a monster, look at the raw experience, explore evolving the snake, uncover some hidden secrets, and finally discuss its death by bureaucracy. Section 1, Genesis of a Monster, Forging the V10. So our story kicks off back in the late 80s. Chrysler executives, mainly Bob Lutz and design chief Tom Gale, team up with the absolute legend Carroll Shelby. Their goal? To build a true spiritual successor to the classic Shelby Cobra. They wanted raw performance, massive power, and just absolutely salacious looks. But what's truly wild here is how they pulled it off. They brought this concept to life and into full production in 1992 on a shoestring budget of just $80 million. You have to realize, in the automotive industry, development cycles usually run into the hundreds of millions or even billions. 80 million is practically pocket change. They had to be so resourceful they even borrowed suspension parts from the Dodge Dakota pickup truck just to keep costs down. And to really grasp how crazy this development was, just look at how they sourced the heart of this beast. Chrysler was already working on a massive V10 engine for their heavy-duty Ram pickup trucks. But obviously, a cast-iron truck block is way too heavy for a nimble sports car. So they handed it over to Lamborghini, which, fun fact, Chrysler actually owned at the time, and had them recast that heavy iron block in aluminum. That one single move dropped 160 pounds of weight and birthed a screaming 400 horsepower V10 monster. Moving on to Section 2, the raw experience, unapologetic engineering. This brings us to the absolutely terrifying physical reality of driving those early Vipers. It was entirely focused on raw, unfiltered performance and nothing else. I mean, that first-generation RT/10 made absolutely zero apologies. You had no glass windows, just plastic side curtains. Exterior door handles? Nope. You literally had to reach inside to open it. The roof was just this flimsy piece of cloth with metal ribs. To actually fit that massive engine and transmission in the car, the pedals were crammed super awkwardly to the left, so you were sitting sort of twisted. And to truly cement its reputation as the American death machine, absolutely zero electronic safety nets. No anti-lock brakes, no traction control. It was just you, a massive engine, and your own survival instincts. And if the lack of safety features wasn't enough to scare you, think about those iconic side-exit exhaust pipes. Because they ran directly underneath the door sills, they generated unbelievable amounts of heat. Seriously, journalists actually cooked bacon and eggs on the door sills to prove a point. If you weren't paying close attention when you stepped out of the car, those pipes would literally scald your calves. Getting that permanent burn scar quickly became a twisted sort of rite of passage for early Viper owners. All right, Section 3, Evolving the Snake, Generations of Venom. Despite all its terrifying quirks, or maybe honestly, because of them, the Viper evolved into a dominating force both on the streets and on international racetracks. You can actually track this evolution just by looking at its famous logos, with every generation taking a more aggressive leap in engineering. You start with Sneaky Pete from the 1992 launch, which was kind of a sly, almost cartoonish icon. Then we get Fangs in 2003, reflecting a much sharper, serious redesign. Finally, the Striker logo debuted in 2013 for the 5th generation. It shows a coiled snake ready to strike, which perfectly matched the car's most potent iteration. And as those logos got angrier, the power figures got absolutely ridiculous. Dodge engineers kept increasing the bore and stroke until that aluminum V10 swelled up to a massive 8.4 liters. By the time we hit the final generation, it was pushing an absolutely blistering 645 horsepower. That made it one of the most fearsome naturally aspirated engines on the planet. But out on the track, the Viper proved it was way more than just a straight-line muscle car. The GTSR version completely embarrassed European exotics by taking first and second in its class at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1998, and then clinching an overall win at Daytona in 2000. And years later, the street-legal 2016 Viper ACR set a mind-blowing 2-minute, 44.2-second record at Car and Driver's Lightning Lap, generating a completely absurd 1,500 pounds of downforce. That brings us to Section 4, Hidden Secrets, Blueprint Easter Eggs. Because beneath all that carbon fiber and extreme aerodynamics, Dodge actually hid a few brilliant secrets for die-hard track enthusiasts in that fifth and final generation. If you look really closely at the interior trim of the 5th-gen Viper, you will find actual track maps etched right into the plastic. Right there on the door pull is a map of Germany's Nürburgring Nordschleife, alongside the Viper's blistering 7-minute and 12-second lap record. Glance down at the cup holder, and you'll spot the Laguna Seca track map with its 1-minute and 33-second record. It was this constant, subtle visual reminder to the driver of exactly what the machine surrounding them was capable of doing. Even better than that, they basically gamified the danger. When you push the engine hard and smack the rev limiter, the Stryker logo right in the background of the digital dash actually lights up an angry glowing red. It's such a beautifully reckless feature. It basically instigates the driver, turning a safety cutoff into a reward for pushing the American death machine to its absolute limits. Which brings us to our final section, Death by Bureaucracy, the Viper's End. So how does a car this beloved, this incredibly powerful, and this capable just suddenly disappear from production in 2017? Well, it definitely wasn't a lack of passion. It was more like a death by 1,000 cuts. First up, you have to consider the shifting market. The Viper was an expensive, hand-built, completely uncompromising niche vehicle. But right across the street at the Chevy dealership, the C7 Corvette Z06 had rolled into town. That Corvette delivered 650 horsepower, it was way more comfortable for a daily commute, and crucially, it was cheaper. The Corvette essentially became a showroom bully, stealing away buyers who wanted hypercar performance without paying that leg-burning, kidney-punching Viper tax. And honestly, the biggest threat wasn't even external. Dodge's own showroom was cannibalizing Viper sales. The Challenger Hellcat dropped with a completely insane 707 horsepower. Plus, it had practical rear seating and a much lower price tag. I mean, think about it. Why buy the expensive, cramped Viper when you can get even more horsepower in a comfortable muscle car? All of this stacked up, leading to a miserable 585 total Viper sales in its final year. But the final, fatal blow was deeply, deeply ironic for a vehicle famously known as a death machine. It all came down to a federal regulation known as FMVSS 226. Now, this was a totally reasonable safety standard that mandated side curtain airbags across the entire auto industry to prevent passengers from being ejected during a rollover crash. The problem? The Viper's cabin was notoriously coffin-tight. It was so incredibly low-slung that there literally wasn't enough physical headroom to engineer and install those mandatory side curtain airbags. To comply, they would have had to do a massive and incredibly expensive redesign of the car's entire roof structure. It is a stark reminder of how raw engineering eventually collides with modern compliance. With sales sitting at fewer than 600 units a year, FCA CEO Sergio Marchiani looked at the math and pulled the plug. The car, defined by danger, was ultimately killed by a safety feature. What makes this ending even more poetic is what happened on the dealership lots afterward. Over the years, the remaining unsold inventory slowly just faded away. But amazingly, the final brand new unregistered Dodge Viper SRT, which was an 8-year-old leftover with delivery mileage, was finally sold in 2024. It was like a ghostly final breath for the V10 monster, quietly finding a home almost a full decade after the factory shut its doors forever. Which leaves us with this one final thought. In our modern automotive era, an era increasingly defined by super strict safety regulations, computerized driving aids, and quiet electric efficiency, has the world moved past the point of ever allowing a machine this beautifully unhinged to exist again? The era might be over for sure, but the legend of the American death machine is absolutely going to live on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.